The doorbell echoed through the house at exactly 11:42 p.m. I remember checking my watch because I'd just finished my evening cup of chamomile tea when the chime broke the silence. Who could possibly be visiting at this hour? My heart skipped a beat when I peered through the peephole and saw my son Peter standing there, shoulders hunched against the autumn chill, his wife Melissa hovering just behind him. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I hadn't heard from them in nearly 6 months. Not since our argument at Thanksgiving when I'd refused to co-sign on their third refinance of their struggling business. It's just not fiscally responsible, I'd told them. I'm retiring soon and need to protect my savings. The silence that followed had been deafening, broken only by occasional terse text messages about the grandchildren's activities that never quite included an invitation for me to attend. So finding them on my doorstep, close to midnight, sent warning signals flashing through my mind. But they were still my family. I opened the door. "Mom," Peter said, his voice carrying that forced cheerfulness I recognized from his childhood when he wanted something he knew I might refuse. "Sorry about the late visit. We were driving back from Uncle Jim's and thought we'd stop by." Uncle Jim lived in Westbrook, 3 hours in the opposite direction. "We need a place to stay tonight," Melissa cut in, never one to circle around her point. "Our house is being fumigated, and the hotel lost our reservation." I didn't quite believe them, but I stepped aside anyway. "Of course," I said. "The guest room is made up." Peter and Melissa exchanged a quick glance. "Actually," Peter said, setting down his overnight bag in my entryway, "we were hoping you'd take the basement room. We need the guest room and Jessica's old room for the kids." I blinked. "The kids are with you? At midnight?" As if on cue, my 3 grandchildren, Emma, 16, Tyler, 14, and little Sophie, 9, shuffled through the door, eyes heavy with sleep, still wearing what looked like pajama bottoms under their coats. "Grandma!" Sophie broke away from her siblings and wrapped her arms around my waist. Despite my confusion, I hugged her tightly, breathing in the familiar scent of the strawberry shampoo she'd used since she was a toddler. "The basement room isn't really set up for guests," I said carefully, pulling back to look at Peter. I was 63, with arthritis in both knees that made the steep basement stairs a daily consideration. The furnace makes that odd clicking sound all night, and there's no bathroom down there. "We'll only be here tonight," Melissa assured me with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "The fumigation will be done tomorrow afternoon. Peter and I really need a good night's sleep. He has an important meeting in the morning, and honestly, you know how the kids get when they're overtired." There was something off about their story. Fumigation is typically scheduled, not emergency. Work, but seeing Sophie's drooping eyelids and Tyler's barely concealed yawn, I relented. "Let me grab some fresh sheets," I said. An hour later, I lay on the lumpy pull-out sofa in my unfinished basement, surrounded by boxes of holiday decorations and old photo albums, listening to the occasional scurrying sounds of what I suspected was a mouse family somewhere behind the water heater. Above me, floorboards creaked as my unexpected guests settled in, seemingly unconcerned about their elderly mother navigating the dark basement if she needed the bathroom during the night. Sleep eluded me as questions circled in my mind. Why show up unannounced? Why the clearly fabricated fumigation story? What was really going on? Around 2 a.m., needing both the bathroom and answers, I carefully made my way upstairs, gripping the railing with both hands. The quiet murmur of voices stopped me just at the top of the stairs. Peter and Melissa were still awake, speaking in hushed but heated tones in the kitchen. "She'll never agree to it," Melissa was saying. "You saw how she reacted to just co-signing the loan." "She doesn't have to agree," Peter replied, his voice carrying that stubborn edge I recognized from his teenage years. The house is worth at least $450,000 now, and she's sitting here alone in all this space while we're drowning in debt. But your name isn't on the deed, Melissa countered. She'd have to sell it willingly. Or we convince her to move into Sunny Pines. Once she's there, we can get power of attorney. Her memory's already slipping. Remember Thanksgiving when she couldn't find her car keys? They were in her hand, Melissa said with a soft laugh that made my blood run cold. Exactly. We document a few more incidents like that, get Dr. Hendricks to sign off. He owes me. After I represented him in that malpractice suit, and we can handle her financial affairs. For her own good, of course. Of course, Melissa echoed, and I could practically hear her smirk. My hand trembled on the railing as the truth crystallized. They hadn't come for a place to stay. They'd come to begin building a case against me. To push me into assisted living and take control of my house, my one significant asset after a lifetime of teaching middle school English on a modest salary. I retreated down the stairs silently, forgetting about my full bladder, my mind racing, faster than it had in years. This was my home, purchased with my late husband Frank 35 years ago. We'd paid off the mortgage by scrimping and saving, foregoing vacations and new cars. I'd raised Peter here, helped care for my grandchildren here. Every corner held memories. Frank's height marks penciled on the kitchen doorframe, the den where I'd graded thousands of essays, the backyard garden we'd tended together until his last summer. And my son was plotting to take it all from me, treating me like some doddering incompetent rather than the woman who'd worked 2 jobs to put him through college. I didn't sleep at all that night. Instead, I formulated a plan. Morning came with the artificial cheerfulness of people playing roles. Peter brought me coffee in a chipped mug I normally used for plant cuttings, asking with exaggerated concern if I'd slept well in the basement. Like a log, I lied, accepting the coffee with a smile that matched his for insincerity. Though I had the strangest dream about selling the house. Must be because Janet down the street just listed hers. The coffee mug paused halfway to Melissa's lips. Selling? You've never mentioned selling before. I shrugged, keeping my expression neutral. Just a dream. But you know, this place is getting to be a lot of maintenance for one person. I rubbed my knee for emphasis. All these stairs, the yard work. I watched the calculation flash in their eyes, the sudden realization that their plan might not be necessary if I willingly sold the house myself. We could help you look at options, Peter offered too quickly. There are some lovely retirement communities near us in Oak Ridge. Near them. An hour away from my friends, my book club, my volunteer work at the library. Near them, who hadn't invited me over in months. Actually, I said, I was thinking of calling Sarah Thompson this morning. Who? Melissa asked, her tone suddenly wary. My realtor friend, I answered, sipping my coffee. She helped the Wilsons sell their place last month. Got them $30,000 over asking with multiple bids. Peter nearly knocked over his coffee in his eagerness. That's a great idea. Mom, in fact, why don't I call Sarah for you? You've got so much to think about with packing and everything. I smiled. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. No need. I have her on speed dial. The morning unfolded in a surreal dance. Peter suddenly discovered urgent errands that could wait until the fumigation was complete. Melissa offered to help me sort through clothing for donation. The children, bless them, simply enjoyed a surprise day off school, though Emma watched the adults with the shrewd gaze of a teenager who senses undercurrents. At 10 a.m. sharp, I excused myself to make a phone call from the privacy of my bedroom. But instead of calling Sarah Thompson the realtor, I called Grace Fitzgerald, my best friend since college, and, more importantly, a recently retired attorney who had specialized in elder law. They said what? Grace's voice rose in indignation after I recounted the conversation I'd overheard. You heard me. I replied, keeping my voice low. They're planning to declare me incompetent because I misplaced my keys at Thanksgiving. Barbara, Grace said firmly, this is elder abuse, financial exploitation. It's illegal, and frankly, it's despicable. I know, I said, surprising myself with how calm I felt. The initial shock had given way to a cold clarity I hadn't experienced since negotiating Frank's medical care during his final illness. But I'm not going to let it happen. Good. First step, get them out of your house immediately. I have a different approach in mind, I said, outlining my plan. By the time we hung up 20 minutes later, Grace was on board, albeit with reservations. Just be careful, she warned, and call me the second you feel unsafe. I rejoined my family downstairs, finding them huddled together in the kitchen, conversation stopping abruptly when I entered. I pretended not to notice. Good news, I announced brightly. Sarah can come by this afternoon to discuss listing the house. The transformation in their demeanor was immediate and disturbing. Suddenly, Peter was the attentive son, offering to make lunch while I rested. Melissa complimented the living room curtains she'd previously called outdated. Even the children were enlisted, with whispered instructions to be extra helpful to Grandma. I watched their performance with a mixture of sadness and resolve. How had my son become someone who would manipulate his own mother? When had our relationship deteriorated to the point where he saw me as a financial resource rather than a person deserving respect? Sarah Thompson arrived at 2 p.m. exactly, her professional smile firmly in place. Peter practically bounded to the door to greet her, ushering her in with effusive welcomes. So wonderful to meet you, he gushed, shaking her hand. Mom's told us so much about you. Sarah raised a perfectly arched eyebrow in my direction. We had, in fact, never met before, today. She was not my realtor friend. She was Grace's niece, briefed thoroughly on the phone about the role she needed to play. Likewise, Sarah said smoothly, setting her leather portfolio on the coffee table. Barbara, shall we discuss your options for listing? For the next hour, Sarah walked us through a convincing presentation about market values, staging strategies, and timeline expectations. Peter and Melissa contributed eagerly, suggesting upgrades that would maximize value and debating open house strategies. So what kind of time frame are we looking at? Peter finally asked, getting to the question that most interested him. How quickly could Mom close on a sale? Sarah made a show of consulting her notes. Well, in this market, with a property as desirable as this one, we could probably close within 30-45 days of listing. I watched Peter and Melissa exchange excited glances, already mentally spending my money. But, Sarah continued, fixing me with a direct look, before we list, I always recommend my clients have their legal affairs in order. Do you have an updated will, Barbara? Power of attorney documents? Healthcare directives? I've been meaning to update those, I said, following our script. I'd be happy to recommend someone, Sarah offered. In fact, I know an excellent firm that specializes in elder law and estate planning. That would be great, I said, ignoring how Peter shifted uncomfortably beside me. Actually, Mom, he interjected, I've been wanting to talk to you about that. As your son, I could handle those matters for you, save you the legal fees. I patted his hand. That's sweet, dear, but I think independent counsel would be best. Keeps everything above board. Sarah nodded approvingly. Very wise. I'll have my contact reach out to you tomorrow. Now, if we could just sign these preliminary agreements to get the ball rolling. She slid several official-looking documents across the table. I signed them with a flourish, noting how Peter leaned forward to examine each one. Wonderful, Sarah said, gathering the papers. I'll be in touch tomorrow with next steps. After showing her out, I turned to find Peter and Melissa beaming at me. This is exciting, Mom, Peter said, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. A new chapter, for all of us. What he didn't know was that I had just signed engagement papers for Grace's law firm, not listing agreements for my house. The only thing I had put on the market today was the illusion of my compliance. That evening, after a dinner where Peter insisted on ordering expensive takeout to celebrate, I excused myself early, claiming fatigue. Instead of returning to the basement, however, I went to my bedroom and locked the door, pulling out the small voice recorder Grace had couriered over while Sarah was keeping my family distracted with real estate jargon. I set it on my nightstand and pressed record. "This is Barbara Mitchell," I spoke clearly into the device. "Today is October 15th, 2023. I am of sound mind and body, and I am making this recording because I have reason to believe my son, Peter Mitchell, and his wife, Melissa Mitchell, are planning to have me declared incompetent in order to gain control of my assets, particularly my home at 147 Maple Street." I detailed the conversation I had overheard, Peter's history of financial requests, and the suspicious circumstances of their sudden appearance. I described their reaction to the possibility of selling the house and their eagerness to handle my legal affairs. "I am not suffering from any cognitive impairment," I continued. "I live independently, manage my own finances, serve on the library board, and teach adult education classes twice weekly. This recording should serve as evidence of my mental capacity should they attempt to challenge it." I ended the recording and sent a copy to Grace's secure email before hiding the recorder itself in my jewelry box beneath a brooch Peter had always coveted but would never think to look under. The next morning brought the culmination of my plan. Over breakfast, where Peter again played the devoted son while Melissa researched retirement communities on her tablet, I made my announcement. "I've made a decision," I said, setting down my toast. "I'm not selling the house after all." The transformation was immediate. Peter's solicitous smile collapsed into a scowl. Melissa's head snapped up from her tablet. "What do you mean?" Peter demanded, all pretense of support evaporating. "You already signed the papers." I sipped my tea calmly. Those weren't listing agreements. They were legal representation documents. Sarah isn't a realtor. She's a legal assistant at Fitzgerald and Associates. The firm will be handling my estate planning going forward. The silence was absolute. Even the children, absorbed in their phones at the far end of the table, looked up at the sudden tension. "You tricked us," Melissa finally sputtered. "No," I corrected her. "I protected myself, just as I did when I recorded your conversation in the kitchen 2 nights ago about having me declared incompetent and seizing power of attorney." Peter's face drained of color. You were spying on us?" "I was using the bathroom in my own home," I replied evenly, "and overheard my son plotting to rob me of my autonomy and my property." "It wasn't like that," he protested weakly. "We were just worried about you living alone." "Save it, Peter," I cut him off. "I heard everything. About Dr. Hendricks owing you a favor, about documenting incidents of memory loss, about taking my house while I rot in Sunny Pines." "Emma," gasped from the end of the table. "Dad, you didn't!" Peter shot her a warning look, but the damage was done. The children were witnesses now, too. "I want you out of my house," I said quietly. "All of you. Today." "Mom, please," Peter began, his tone shifting to the placating one he'd used when caught lying as a child. "We can talk about this." "There's nothing to talk about," I said, rising from the table. "You came here under false pretenses. You made your elderly mother sleep in a basement without bathroom access. You plotted to have me declared incompetent. And you did it all because you wanted my money." I looked at each of them in turn, even the children, who needed to understand the gravity of what their parents had attempted. "I'll be changing my will this afternoon," I continued. "Fitzgerald and Associates will ensure that all my assets are protected by a trust that you cannot access, Peter. The house will eventually go to the grandchildren directly, with strict provisions that you cannot manage those assets for them." Melissa stood so abruptly her chair toppled backward. "This is ridiculous. You're punishing us because we wanted to help you." "No," I said, feeling oddly calm in the face of her rage. "I'm establishing consequences for attempted elder abuse. You're fortunate I'm not pressing charges. An option, Grace assures me, is very much on the table." Peter looked as though I'd slapped him. "You'd do that? To your own son?" The question hung in the air between us, heavy with decades of history. I thought of the little boy who had once climbed into my lap for comfort after scraping his knee. The teenager I'd stayed up late helping with science projects. The young man I'd co-signed for when he bought his first car. I'd do anything to protect myself from someone who sees me as a resource rather than a person, I answered finally, even if that someone is my son. The packing was done in silence. No more false cheer, no more pretense of family unity. The children moved through the house like ghosts, eyes wide and confused, occasionally shooting uncertain glances my way. I felt for them, caught in a mess of adult making, but I wouldn't soften my stance. They needed to see that there were lines that shouldn't be crossed, even within families. As they loaded the last bag into their SUV, Peter approached me one final time on the porch. "This isn't who we are, Mom," he said quietly. "We got desperate. The business is failing. We're behind on the mortgage. We just needed help." "You could have asked," I replied. "Honestly, directly asked. Instead, you tried to take." He looked away, unable to meet my eyes. Will we ever come back from this?" I considered the question seriously. "I don't know, Peter. Trust, once broken, isn't easily repaired. But I do know this. Whatever relationship we salvage won't be built on financial dependence. It will be built on mutual respect or not at all." He nodded once, sharply, then turned and walked to the car without another word. I watched them drive away, feeling a complex mixture of sadness, anger, and something else. Relief. The masks were off. The painful truth exposed. Whatever came next would at least be honest. That afternoon, I met with Grace and her associates, setting in motion the legal protections I now knew I needed. I established a trust for my grandchildren's education, a foundation to support elder abuse prevention in my community, and yes, plans for my own future care that no one could override without significant legal hurdles. "You handled this with remarkable composure," Grace said as we left her office. "I'd have been tempted to burn the whole thing down around them." I smiled, thinking of the grandmother's cottage in the backyard that Peter had always coveted. I briefly considered selling the house to a developer who would build a fast food restaurant with a drive-through window directly facing their bedroom. Grace laughed. "That's the Barbara I know and love." As I drove home, to my home, secure in my ownership, I reflected on how quickly life could change. 3 days ago, I had been drifting in a lonely holding pattern, waiting for my son to remember my birthday or invite me to a school event. Now I was wide awake, seeing clearly perhaps for the first time in years. The house felt different when I returned. Emptier, certainly, but also somehow more mine than it had been in a long time. I walked through each room, touching familiar surfaces, reconnecting with the home Frank and I had made together. In the kitchen, I found Sophie's hair ribbon forgotten on the counter, a small pink reminder of collateral damage. I tucked it into my pocket, a token to return someday when bridges might be rebuilt. Not today, probably not soon, but someday, when truth had done its painful, necessary work. That evening, I sat on my porch swing, the same spot where Frank and I had watched countless sunsets together, and called my sister in Arizona. "Janet," I said when she answered, "I'm thinking of coming for that visit we've talked about. Maybe for a month or two." "Really?" Her surprise was evident. "What about Peter and the grandkids?" "It's a long story. I said, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. But the short version is, I've decided it's time to start living for myself again. Well, hallelujah, she replied. It's about damn time. As darkness settled over my neighborhood, I felt a strange sense of peace. The future stretched before me, uncertain but mine to shape. I had protected what mattered, not just my house and savings, but my dignity and autonomy. In doing so, I had discovered a strength I'd forgotten I possessed. They had made me sleep in the basement, thinking me weak and pliable. But I had emerged stronger, with clearer vision and firmer boundaries. Tomorrow, I would call the travel agent about Arizona. Next week, I would attend my first board meeting for the Elder Abuse Foundation. In the spring, I might plant the vegetable garden Frank and I had always talked about. Small steps into a future I was choosing for myself. One where I might be alone, but I would never again be diminished. Sleep eluded me as questions circled in my mind. Why show up unannounced? Why the clearly fabricated fumigation story? What was really going on? Around 2 a.m., needing both the bathroom and answers, I carefully made my way upstairs, gripping the railing with both hands. The quiet murmur of voices stopped me just at the top of the stairs. Peter and Melissa were still awake, speaking in hushed, but heated tones in the kitchen. She'll never agree to it, Melissa was saying. You saw how she reacted to just co-signing the loan. She doesn't have to agree, Peter replied, his voice carrying that stubborn edge I recognized from his teenage years. The house is worth at least $450,000 now, and she's sitting here alone in all this space while we're drowning in debt. But your name isn't on the deed, Melissa countered. She'd have to sell it willingly. Or we convince her to move into Sunny Pines. Once she's there, we can get power of attorney. Her memory's already slipping. Remember Thanksgiving when she couldn't find her car keys? They were in her hand, Melissa said with a soft laugh that made my blood run cold. Exactly. We document a few more incidents like that. Get Dr. Hendricks to sign off. He owes me after I represented him in that malpractice suit, and we can handle her financial affairs. For her own good, of course. Of course, Melissa echoed, and I could practically hear her smirk. My hand trembled on the railing as the truth crystallized. They hadn't come for a place to stay. They'd come to begin building a case against me, to push me into assisted living and take control of my house, my one significant asset after a lifetime of teaching middle school English on a modest salary. I retreated down the stairs silently, forgetting about my full bladder, my mind racing, faster than it had in years. This was my home, purchased with my late husband Frank 35 years ago. We'd paid off the mortgage by scrimping and saving, foregoing vacations and new cars. I'd raised Peter here, helped care for my grandchildren here. Every corner held memories, Frank's height marks penciled on the kitchen doorframe, the den where I'd graded thousands of essays, the backyard garden we'd tended together until his last summer. And my son was plotting to take it all from me, treating me like some doddering incompetent rather than the woman who'd worked 2 jobs to put him through college. I didn't sleep at all that night. Instead, I formulated a plan. As I lay in the darkness of the basement, memories flooded back, a slideshow of moments that should have warned me about Peter's sense of entitlement. The pattern had been there for years, but I'd refused to see it, making excuses, blinding myself with maternal love. When Peter was 16, Frank gave him our old Toyota for his birthday. 3 weeks later, Peter asked for a newer model because his friends' parents had given them better cars. When we refused, he stopped speaking to us for nearly a month, creating such tension that Frank eventually relented and dipped into our vacation fund to buy him a more expensive vehicle. I disagreed but stayed silent, not wanting to come between father and son. The beach trip we'd planned never materialized. In college, Peter majored in business, but spent more time networking at fraternity parties than studying. His grades plummeted, and by his junior year, he was on academic probation. College isn't teaching me what I really need to know, he'd explained when I expressed concern. I'm making connections, Mom. That's what matters in the real world. I'd taken on extra tutoring sessions after school to cover his tuition after he lost his scholarship. Frank called it enabling, but I couldn't bear the thought of Peter not finishing his degree. Looking back, I realize I was teaching him exactly the wrong lesson, that someone would always bail him out of the consequences of his choices. When Peter met Melissa during his senior year, I was initially relieved. She was ambitious and focused, studying accounting with a clear career path ahead of her. I hoped her discipline would balance Peter's more carefree approach to life. What I hadn't anticipated was how their combined materialism would amplify rather than mitigate his sense of entitlement. Their wedding was the first clear sign of trouble. They insisted on a lavish ceremony at Oak Ridge Country Club, with a guest list of over 200 people, many of whom were business contacts they hoped to impress rather than actual friends or family. When Frank gently suggested scaling back, given our modest savings, Peter looked genuinely shocked. "But this is our wedding day," he'd protested. "Don't you want us to have everything we deserve?" That word, deserve, had become Peter's mantra. He deserved the best house in the best neighborhood. He deserved the luxury car and the vacation home. Whether he'd earned these things seemed irrelevant to him. The world owed him a particular lifestyle simply because he wanted it. Frank and I emptied our retirement fund to pay for that wedding. I still remember Frank's face when he signed the check, resignation mixed with disappointment. "Just this once," he'd said. "After this, they're on their own." But we both knew it wouldn't be the last time Peter asked for money. The startup capital request came just 6 months later. Peter and a fraternity brother had a can't-miss business opportunity, an upscale bar and grill near the financial district. They needed $75,000 from each set of parents to secure the location. "It's an investment," Peter had insisted over dinner at our house. "You'll get it back tenfold when we succeed." Frank, always more practical than me, had asked to see their business plan. When Peter couldn't produce more than a few pages of optimistic projections, Frank had refused. "No business plan, no investment," he'd said firmly. "That's just basic sense, son." The argument that followed was ugly. Peter accused us of not believing in him, of never supporting his dreams. Melissa sat silently, her disapproval palpable. In every glance she shot Frank's way. When they stormed out that night, Peter didn't speak to us for almost 3 months, right up until Emma was born. As I lay in the basement, I could still feel the joy of that reconciliation. How quickly I'd forgiven everything when Peter called from the hospital, his voice choked with emotion as he asked if I wanted to meet my granddaughter. In that moment, all the disappointment and hurt had melted away. Family was family after all. What followed was a pattern that repeated with depressing regularity. Peter would reach out when he needed something: money for the struggling restaurant, babysitting during Melissa's business trips, co-signers for loans. When we helped, we were temporarily back in their good graces. When we couldn't or wouldn't, the silent treatment would begin again. When Frank was diagnosed with heart disease 8 years ago, Peter's visits became increasingly focused on financial discussions. How much was covered by insurance? What would happen to the house if Frank needed long-term care? Had we updated our will? I'd attributed this to practical concern at the time, appreciating that Peter was planning ahead for difficult scenarios. Now, lying in the dark with the truth exposed by their own words upstairs, I saw those conversations for what they were: inventory taking, asset assessment. Frank deteriorated rapidly in those final months, his once robust frame withering as his heart struggled to perform its essential function. One night, during a moment of unusual clarity near the end, he'd gripped my hand with surprising strength. "Barbara," he'd said, his voice barely above a whisper, "promise me you'll protect yourself when I'm gone." At the time, I thought he was worried about my living alone, about my handling home maintenance or feeling lonely. I'd assured him I would be fine, that our friends would look after me. Now, with awful clarity, I wondered if he'd seen something in Peter that I had been too blind to recognize. Frank died on a Tuesday morning in early spring. At the funeral, Peter had been appropriately solemn, accepting condolences with a dignified nod, standing beside me as friends and colleagues shared memories of his father. Later that week, as we met with the attorney about Frank's will, Peter's demeanor had shifted subtly. "So the house is fully paid off?" he'd asked, interrupting the attorney's explanation of the straightforward will. "And it transfers completely to Mom?" The attorney had confirmed this, explaining that Frank had left everything to me, with Peter named as the sole beneficiary of my estate unless I specified otherwise in my own will. "That's standard," the attorney had explained. "But Mrs. Mitchell, I always advise my clients to review their estate plans every few years or after major life events. If you'd like to discuss your options..." "I'm sure that won't be necessary," Peter had interjected smoothly. "Mom will want to keep things simple. Right, Mom?" I'd nodded, still numb with grief, incapable of thinking about further legal arrangements, when I was still adjusting to the emptiness beside me in bed each night. Within a month of Frank's death, the requests began. First, it was just a loan to expand the restaurant, which had never quite achieved the success Peter had envisioned. Then it was help with Emma's private school tuition. Dad would have wanted his granddaughter to have the best education. Next came the ill-fated expansion to a second location, which failed within a year despite the substantial investment Peter had pressured me to make. Over the next 7 years, I estimate I gave Peter nearly $200,000, loans that were never repaid, investments that never returned a penny, direct gifts for the grandchildren's needs. Each time, I dipped into the modest nest egg Frank had left me, rationalizing that family was the most important thing, that I was helping secure my son's future. What I was actually doing was enabling his irresponsible financial behavior while depleting my own security. By last Thanksgiving, when Peter and Melissa asked me to co-sign on yet another business loan, this time to restructure their mounting debt, I had finally reached my limit. "I can't do it anymore," I'd told them as we sat in their expensive dining room, the remains of a meal I had largely prepared cooling on Melissa's designer china. "I'm retiring next year, and I need what's left for my own expenses." Peter had stared at me as if I'd suddenly started speaking a foreign language. "But Mom, what are we supposed to do? The bank won't approve the loan without a co-signer." "Perhaps that's a sign you shouldn't take on more debt," I'd suggested gently. "Maybe it's time to consider downsizing, scaling back until the business is truly profitable." The suggestion was met with twin expressions of horror. "Downsizing?" Melissa had repeated, as if I'd suggested they move into a cardboard box. "Do you have any idea what that would do to our standing in the community? To the children's social connections?" "We're not asking for money," Peter had added, his tone reasonable but his eyes hard. "Just your signature. You won't have to pay. Anything unless we default, which we won't." "I'm sorry," I'd said, surprising myself with my firmness. "I just can't take that risk at this stage of my life." The pleasant family dinner had devolved quickly after that. Peter had accused me of abandoning them when they needed me most. Melissa had made pointed comments about selfish decisions and how hard it would be to explain to the children why they might have to leave their schools and activities. Even the grandchildren were deployed as emotional leverage. "Grandma doesn't want to help us," Peter had told Emma when she wandered in, confused by the raised voices. "She has her own priorities." I'd left their house that night feeling like a villain in my own family story, questioning my decision all the way home. But as painful as that evening had been, it had also crystallized something important. Peter and Melissa saw me primarily as a financial resource, not as a person with my own needs and concerns. The months of silence that followed had been difficult. I missed the grandchildren terribly, especially as the holidays approached. I sent Christmas presents that received no acknowledgement beyond a terse text message. Kids got your gifts. Thanks. No photos, no phone calls, no invitations to see them open their packages. I threw myself into preparing for retirement, focusing on my book club, my church activities, my small circle of loyal friends who had supported me through Frank's illness and death. Grace Fitzgerald had been particularly steadfast, inviting me to her lake house for weekends, checking in regularly with phone calls, making sure I didn't spend too much time alone with my thoughts. "They're punishing you," she'd observed bluntly during one of our coffee dates. "Using access to the grandchildren as leverage to get what they want. It's emotional blackmail, Barbara." I'd winced at the term, but couldn't deny its accuracy. "They're struggling financially," I'd offered weakly. "Stress makes people act in ways they normally wouldn't." Grace had fixed me with her attorney's penetrating stare. "Are they, though? Because from what you've told me, their struggles involve maintaining a lifestyle well beyond what most people would consider necessary. The country club membership, the luxury cars, the vacation home they barely use, those aren't needs, they're wants." She was right, of course. Peter and Melissa had created a life that required constant financial infusions to maintain. A house in the most prestigious neighborhood, private schools, expensive hobbies, image-conscious spending designed to impress their social circle rather than provide actual contentment. Lying in my basement that night, I wondered when Peter had developed such a warped relationship with money and status. Frank and I had lived modestly, prioritizing security over luxury. We'd taught Peter, or thought we had taught him, the value of hard work, delayed gratification, and living within one's means. Somewhere along the way, those lessons had failed to take root. Instead, Peter had absorbed the toxic message that appearances mattered above all else, that one's worth was measured by possessions rather than character, that financial shortcuts were preferable to sustained effort. And now, that distorted value system had led him to the point where he could justify attempting to seize control of his own mother's assets, all while convincing himself he was acting in my best interest. The realization brought tears to my eyes, not just of anger, but of profound sadness. What had happened to the sweet boy who once made me handmade Mother's Day cards? The teenager who'd spent a whole weekend helping Frank repair the back deck without complaint? The young man who'd promised at his father's graveside to always look after me? Had those moments been genuine, or had I imagined the depth of connection I thought we shared? As I wiped away tears in the darkness, I forced myself to confront another painful truth, my own role in creating this situation. I had enabled Peter's sense of entitlement with each check I'd written, each time I'd capitulated to emotional manipulation, each occasion when I'd prioritized keeping peace over setting healthy boundaries. Frank had seen it happening and had tried to establish firmer limits. But after his death, I'd abandoned even those modest guardrails in my loneliness and grief. Perhaps I'd thought I could buy Peter's affection and attention, ensuring I remained important in his life by making myself financially indispensable. If so, the strategy had backfired spectacularly. Rather than strengthening our bond, it had reduced our relationship to a series of transactions, love and attention in exchange for financial support. When I finally said no, the relationship had collapsed entirely, revealing its hollow foundation. The worst part was the realization that Peter wasn't just damaging his relationship with me. He was teaching his children the same warped values. Sweet Sophie, thoughtful Emma, quiet Tyler, they were watching and learning. What lessons were they absorbing as they observed their parents' scheme to take advantage of their grandmother? Around 4 a.m., as I lay listening to the house settle around me, I made a decision. This wouldn't be a story of victimhood. I wouldn't play the role of the helpless elderly mother, manipulated and taken advantage of by her ungrateful children. I had allowed this situation to develop through my own choices, and I would correct it the same way. Peter and Melissa had made a critical error in their planning. They assumed I was the same conflict-avoidant, peace at any price mother I had. Always been the woman who would sacrifice her own security rather than create uncomfortable confrontations. They thought my desire for family harmony would override my instinct for self-preservation. They had forgotten that before I was Peter's mother, I was Barbara Mitchell, the woman who had worked her way through college against her own parents' objections, who had taught generations of middle schoolers to find their voices, who had faced down school boards and angry parents to defend her teaching methods, who had managed Frank's medical care with fierce advocacy when the system tried to dismiss his symptoms. That Barbara had been submerged beneath decades of maternal accommodation. But she wasn't gone. And as I lay in that basement, plotting my response to my son's betrayal, I felt her resurface with clarifying anger and determination. By dawn, I had formulated a plan, one that would protect my assets, establish unmistakable boundaries, and possibly, though I recognize this might be overly optimistic, create an opportunity for a healthier relationship in the future. It would require courage, strategic thinking, and the willingness to face painful confrontations. Most importantly, it would require me to value my own welfare as highly as I had always valued my son's. When the first gray light of morning filtered through the small basement window, I carefully made my way upstairs, my knees protesting the steep climb. The house was still quiet, my unexpected guests apparently sleeping in after their late-night strategy session. I moved silently to my bedroom, collected fresh clothing, and slipped into the bathroom for a quick shower. As the hot water eased the stiffness in my joints, I rehearsed what I would say and do in the hours ahead. By the time I emerged, dressed, and composed, I felt a strange sense of calm, the tranquility that comes with absolute clarity of purpose. In the kitchen, I began preparing breakfast. Not my usual simple toast and tea, but a full spread of pancakes, eggs, and bacon. The aroma would soon draw my family downstairs, and I wanted them gathered together for what would come next. I hummed softly as I worked, an old habit from years of early morning lesson preparations. As I mixed pancake batter, I glanced out the window at my modest backyard. The garden Frank and I had tended together was overgrown now. I hadn't had the heart to maintain it properly after his death. But the old oak tree still stood strong, its branches now bare in the November chill. We had hung a swing from that tree when Peter was small, and I could almost see the ghost of him there, pumping his legs to go higher, his childish voice calling, "Watch me, Mom. Watch how high I can go." What had happened to that joyful child? Where had I gone wrong in guiding him to adulthood? Was it possible to rebuild something healthier from the wreckage of our relationship? Or had we reached a point of no return? These questions had no immediate answers, and in truth, they weren't the most pressing concerns. First, I needed to secure my position, to ensure that Peter and Melissa's scheme couldn't succeed. Once my own safety was established, then perhaps there would be space to address the deeper wounds in our family. The sound of footsteps on the stairs interrupted my thoughts. Showtime, I thought, schooling my features into a pleasant expression that revealed nothing of my night's discoveries or my morning's resolutions. "Good morning," I called cheerfully, flipping a perfectly golden pancake onto a growing stack. "I thought you all might be hungry after your unexpected journey last night." Peter appeared in the doorway, his hair still rumpled from sleep, eyes widening slightly at the breakfast spread. For a moment he looked disoriented, as if he couldn't quite remember where he was or why. "Mom," he said finally, his tone cautious, "you didn't have to go to all this trouble." "No trouble at all," I replied, my voice warm but my eyes watchful. "After all, it's not every day I get a surprise visit from my family." He shifted uncomfortably, guilt flashing briefly across his features before he masked it with a yawn. "How did you sleep? I know that basement couch isn't the most comfortable." "Like a log," I lied smoothly, setting plates on the table. "Though I had the strangest dream about selling the house. Must be because Janet down the street just listed hers." The calculated casualness with which I introduced the topic had its intended effect. Peter froze momentarily, then tried to appear nonchalant as he poured himself coffee. Selling? You've never mentioned selling before. I shrugged, keeping my expression neutral. Just a dream. But this place is getting to be a lot of maintenance for one person. I rubbed my knee for emphasis. All these stairs, the yard work. I watched the calculation flash in his eyes, the sudden realization that their plan might not be necessary if I willingly sold the house myself. It was almost too easy, this manipulation of the manipulator. I felt a moment of sadness that I could read my own son's intentions so clearly that I knew exactly which bait he would take without hesitation. Before he could respond, thundering footsteps announced the arrival of the children, with Melissa following close behind, already, dressed in a casual but expensive-looking outfit suitable for a house guest rather than a fugitive from fumigation. "Pancakes!" Sophie exclaimed, climbing onto a chair and reaching eagerly for the syrup. "Grandma makes the best pancakes." "Don't drown them, Sophie," Melissa cautioned automatically, her gaze sweeping critically over the kitchen before settling on me. "Barbara, this is too much. You should have waited for me to help." "Nonsense," I replied, serving the children with the ease of long practice. "I've been making family breakfasts for 40 years. Besides, I wanted to do something special since your visit was such a surprise." I emphasized the word slightly, noting how Melissa's smile tightened at the edges. She was sharper than Peter, more attuned to subtle cues. I would need to be careful around her. "So," I continued brightly as everyone settled around the table, "tell me more about this fumigation. What company are you using? I've been thinking I should have this place checked for termites." The question landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples of discomfort around the table. Peter and Melissa exchanged quick glances, neither, apparently having developed their cover story beyond the basic premise. "It's, West Side Pest Control." Peter improvised poorly. "Really thorough job. Takes 24 hours. "West Side?" I repeated innocently. "I thought they went out of business last year after that lawsuit. Something about using banned chemicals?" Another panicked look between them. Emma, the oldest and most perceptive of the grandchildren, watched this exchange with narrowed eyes, clearly sensing the undercurrents. "It might be a different company," Melissa jumped in smoothly. "Peter handles all those household arrangements." I nodded as if accepting this explanation, then changed tactics. "Well, anyway, I'm glad you're here. I've been wanting to talk to you all about my retirement plans. I'm thinking of making some changes." And with that opening, I began laying the groundwork for the confrontation to come. A carefully choreographed performance designed to expose their scheme while protecting my interests. As I spoke of downsizing and simplifying my life, I watched hope and opportunism bloom in their expressions, completely unaware that I had heard every word of their midnight plotting. The trap was set. Now I just needed them to walk into it. Morning came with the artificial cheerfulness of people playing roles. Peter brought me coffee in a chipped mug I normally used for plant cuttings, asking with exaggerated concern if I'd slept well in the basement. "Like a log," I lied, accepting the coffee with a smile that matched his for insincerity. "Though I had the strangest dream about selling the house. Must be because Janet down the street just listed hers." The coffee mug paused halfway to Melissa's lips. "Selling? You've never mentioned selling before." I shrugged, keeping my expression neutral. "Just a dream. But this place is getting to be a lot of maintenance for one person." I rubbed my knee for emphasis. All these stairs, the yard work. I watched the calculation flash in their eyes, the sudden realization that their plan might not be necessary if I willingly sold the house myself. "We could help you look at options," Peter offered too quickly. "There are some lovely retirement communities near us in Oak Ridge. Near them, an hour away from my friends, my book club, my volunteer work at the library. near them, who hadn't invited me over in months. "Actually," I said, "I was thinking of calling Sarah Thompson this morning." "Who?" Melissa asked, her tone suddenly wary. "My realtor friend," I answered, sipping my coffee. "She helped the Wilsons sell their place last month. Got them $30,000 over asking with multiple bids." Peter nearly knocked over his coffee in his eagerness. "That's a great idea, Mom. In fact, why don't I call Sarah for you? You've got so much to think about with packing and everything." I smiled. "No need. I have her on speed dial." The morning unfolded in a surreal dance. Peter suddenly discovered urgent errands that could wait until the fumigation was complete. Melissa offered to help me sort through clothing for donation. The children, bless them, simply enjoyed a surprise day off school, though Emma watched the adults with the shrewd gaze of a teenager who senses undercurrents. At 10 a.m. sharp, I excused myself to make a phone call from the privacy of my bedroom. But instead of calling Sarah Thompson, the realtor, I called Grace Fitzgerald, my best friend since college, and, more importantly, a recently retired attorney who had specialized in elder law. "They said what?" Grace's voice rose in indignation after I recounted the conversation I'd overheard. "You heard me," I replied, keeping my voice low. "They're planning to declare me incompetent because I misplaced my keys at Thanksgiving." "Barbara," Grace said firmly, "this is elder abuse, financial exploitation. It's illegal, and frankly, it's despicable." "I know," I said, surprising myself with how calm I felt. The initial shock had given way to a cold clarity I hadn't experienced since negotiating Frank's medical care during his final illness. But I'm not going to let it happen. "Good. First step. Get them out of your house immediately." "I have a different approach in mind," I said, outlining my plan. By the time we hung up 20 minutes later, Grace was on board, albeit with reservations. "Just be careful," she warned. "And call me the second you feel unsafe." I rejoined my family downstairs, finding them huddled together in the kitchen, conversation stopping abruptly when I entered. I pretended not to notice. "Good news," I announced brightly. "Sarah can come by this afternoon to discuss listing the house." The transformation in their demeanor was immediate and disturbing. Suddenly, Peter was the attentive son, offering to make lunch while I rested. Melissa complimented the living room curtains she'd previously called outdated. Even the children were enlisted, with whispered instructions to be extra helpful to Grandma. I watched their performance with a mixture of sadness and resolve. How had my son become someone who would manipulate his own mother? When had our relationship deteriorated to the point where he saw me as a financial resource rather than a person deserving respect? My phone buzzed with a text from Grace. "Sarah will arrive at 2. Documents prepared. Are you absolutely sure about this?" I typed back a simple reply. Never more certain of anything in my life. The next few hours were a masterclass in acting, on both sides. I pretended to be an elderly mother grateful for her son's sudden attentiveness. Peter and Melissa pretended to be concerned children looking out for my best interests. Only the grandchildren were authentic, with Sophie asking if she could still visit me if I moved to a new house, and Tyler wondering aloud if I would take the basement ping-pong table they loved to play on during their increasingly rare visits. "We'll figure all that out," Peter assured them with forced heartiness. "Grandma might not have room for big things like that where she's going." Where I was going, as if my future had already been decided, my autonomy an afterthought to their financial planning. Around noon, Peter announced he needed to run to the hardware store for a quick errand and would be back before the realtor arrived. I knew he was likely calling his attorney friend, perhaps laying groundwork for the power of attorney he assumed would soon be necessary. Melissa kept the children occupied with a board game in the living room, periodically shooting glances my way as I puttered around the kitchen, humming to myself. "You seem cheerful," she observed during one such moment, her tone suggesting this was somehow suspicious. I smiled, arranging cookies on a plate for our upcoming visitor. It's a relief, honestly. I've been thinking about downsizing for a while, but couldn't quite bring myself to start the process. Having you all here has given me the push I needed. She nodded slowly, clearly trying to assess whether I was genuinely this compliant or if there was some hidden catch she should be wary of. Peter will make sure you get the best price possible, she assured me. He's very good at negotiations. Oh, I'm sure he is, I replied, thinking of all the times he had negotiated his way into my savings account. But Sarah knows the market so well, I trust her completely. Melissa's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Still, it's good to have family looking out for your interests. The irony was so thick I could have sliced it and served it alongside the cookies. Instead, I simply nodded agreeably and continued my preparations for Sarah's arrival. Peter returned at 1:30, carrying a small bag from the hardware store, a prop to support his fabricated errand, and a bouquet of supermarket flowers that he presented with a flourish. "Just a little something to brighten your day, Mom," he said, kissing my cheek with uncharacteristic affection. I accepted the flowers with appropriate gratitude, arranging them in a vase while wondering what these performances cost them emotionally. Did they feel any genuine remorse for their plotting? Or was the manipulation so normal to them now that it caused no dissonance? At precisely 2 p.m., the doorbell rang. Peter practically sprinted to answer it, eager to take control of the interaction. From the start, I followed more slowly, deliberately emphasizing my arthritic limp for effect. Sarah Thompson, actually Jessica Patel, Grace's niece and a partner in her law firm, stood on the porch, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, leather portfolio tucked under her arm. She had been thoroughly briefed and played her role flawlessly, accepting Peter's effusive welcome with professional courtesy. "Mrs. Mitchell," she said, extending her hand to me. "So lovely to see you again. I've brought the preliminary documents we discussed." I shook her hand, noting Peter's momentary confusion at the implication that we had previous conversations he wasn't privy to. "Please come in," I said. "I've made coffee and cookies." "Actually," Peter interjected smoothly, "why don't we go straight to the dining room to review the paperwork? Mom, you should sit down and rest your knee while we handle the details." There it was, the first overt attempt to exclude me from decisions about my own property. Sarah caught it too, her professional smile never wavering as she responded. "Oh, I'll need Mrs. Mitchell's direct input throughout the process. She's the homeowner, after all, and these decisions are quite personal." Peter's smile faltered slightly. "Of course, but as her son, I can help simplify things. Mom gets confused, sometimes with legal terminology." I almost laughed aloud at the transparent attempt to establish my supposed incompetence for our visitor. Instead, I simply led the way to the dining room table where I had already arranged notepads and pens. For the next hour, Sarah conducted a masterful performance, presenting what appeared to be standard real estate listing documents, but were actually legal declarations establishing my mental competence, financial independence, and explicit rejection of any power of attorney for Peter. She carefully explained each clause in terms of property values and selling timelines, while I signed page after page documenting my clear mental state and autonomous decision-making. Capacity. Peter hovered anxiously, trying to read the documents upside down across the table, occasionally asking pointed questions that Sarah deflected with professional ease. "These commission rates seem high," he objected at one point. "Perhaps we should get a second opinion." "The rates are standard for premium marketing packages," Sarah replied smoothly. "But Mrs. Mitchell is welcome to seek other opinions, of course. There's no obligation until the final listing agreement is signed." I watched my son's growing frustration with a mixture of sadness and vindication. Every barrier to his plan heightened his agitation, making it increasingly difficult for him to maintain his caring facade. "When could we reasonably expect to close a sale?" Melissa asked, joining us at the table after settling the children with a movie in the den. Barbara will need to make arrangements for her next living situation quite quickly. The presumption that I would need their help to make arrangements hung in the air, another subtle reinforcement of my supposed helplessness. The market is moving quickly right now, Sarah answered. Potentially 30-45 days from listing to closing, though that depends on various factors including the buyer's financing. Peter nodded eagerly. That's perfect. We've been researching some excellent assisted living communities near us in Oak Ridge. Haven't we, Melissa? Absolutely, Melissa confirmed with manufactured enthusiasm. Sunny Pines is beautiful, Barbara. Like a resort, really. And only 10 minutes from our house, so we could visit all the time. I nodded pleasantly, as if this were news to me rather than confirmation of exactly what I'd overheard them planning in the night. How thoughtful of you to research options. Though I've actually been considering something different for my next chapter. A flicker of alarm passed between them. Different how? Peter asked cautiously. Sarah intervened before I could answer. Mrs. Mitchell mentioned possibly looking at condominiums in the downtown area, close to the library where she volunteers. And her book club meetings. Downtown? Melissa's horror was barely concealed. But that's so urban and far from us. Only 30 minutes, I pointed out mildly. And I do love being able to walk to the shops and cafes. But your safety, Mom, Peter protested. And wouldn't you rather be closer to the grandchildren? The same grandchildren I hadn't been permitted to see for months due to my refusal to co-sign their loan. The same grandchildren who were currently being used as emotional leverage. We can discuss all the options later, I said with a placid smile. Right now, let's focus on the house listing. Sarah, what else do we need to cover today? As Sarah pulled out more documents from her portfolio, I caught a glimpse of Peter's face. The mask of concerned son had slipped, revealing naked calculation beneath. He was running scenarios in his head, trying to determine how to regain control of a situation that was rapidly slipping from his grasp. When Sarah finally closed her portfolio an hour later, Peter was visibly anxious. So, what happens next? He pressed. When will the listing go live? I'll need to prepare the final documents based on our discussion today, Sarah explained. Mrs. Mitchell and I will meet again tomorrow to review and sign them. After that, we'll schedule the photographer and get the listing online, probably by early next week. Tomorrow? Peter repeated. I should be present for that meeting too, to help Mom understand the fine print. Sarah gave him a professional smile that conveyed polite dismissal. That won't be necessary. Mrs. Mitchell has shown a clear understanding of the process and her options. Unless she specifically requests your presence, our standard procedure is to meet with the homeowner. Directly, the rebuff was gentle but unmistakable. Peter's jaw tightened momentarily before he forced another smile. Well, at least let me drive Mom to your office. Her night vision isn't what it used to be. Actually, Sarah countered smoothly, I'll be coming here again. House calls are part of our premium service package. With that final counter to his attempts at control, Sarah thanked us for the coffee, shook hands all around, and departed with promises to return the next day at 10 a.m. As soon as the door closed behind her, the atmosphere in the house changed. Palpably. The performance of the caring, supportive family had taken its toll, and fissures were beginning to show. She seemed efficient, Melissa commented with faint disapproval, though I'm not sure she fully explained the tax implications of your sale. Perhaps we should consult our financial advisor before you sign anything final. I trust Sarah's expertise, I said mildly. She comes highly recommended. Peter paced the living room, his agitation no longer concealed. I still think we should get a second opinion on the listing price. And this rush to look at downtown condos? It doesn't make sense, Mom. You've always said you hate city noise. People change, I replied. After 40 years in the suburbs, I'm ready for something different. He stopped pacing to stare at me, as if truly seeing me for the first time that day. "You seem different. Since when do you make major life decisions without discussing them with family first?" The question hung in the air between us, a question that revealed so much about how he viewed me and our relationship. In his mind, my autonomy was conditional, subject to family approval. My decisions required consensus rather than simply being my own to make. "I've had plenty of time to think about my future, Peter," I said carefully. "Since Thanksgiving, actually." The reference to our last major conflict was not lost on him. His expression hardened slightly before he caught himself and forced another smile. "Of course, but everything's happening so quickly now. I just want to make sure you don't have regrets later." "That's what children are for, isn't it?" I responded with deliberate ambiguity. "To ensure their parents don't have regrets?" Melissa, ever practical, interrupted this increasingly tense exchange. "The children are getting restless. Peter, why don't you take them to the park for a while? I'll help Barbara with dinner preparations." Peter looked ready to object, clearly reluctant to leave me alone with Sarah's paperwork. But the sound of Sophie and Tyler bickering in the den made the suggestion reasonable. With obvious reluctance, he gathered the children for an outing, promising to return within an hour. Once they were gone, Melissa dropped all pretense of warmth. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, her expression calculating. "What are you really doing, Barbara?" she asked bluntly. "This sudden decision to sell, the downtown condo idea, it doesn't add up." I met her gaze steadily. "I'm securing my future, Melissa, ensuring I have the resources and independence I need for my retirement years." "And you couldn't discuss this with us first? We're family. We want what's best for you." "Do you?" I asked quietly. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "What's that supposed to mean?" For a moment, I considered revealing that I had overheard their late-night plotting. The temptation to confront her directly was strong. But Grace's advice echoed in my mind. Don't show your full hand until all the legal protections are in place. Instead, I sighed and softened my tone. It means that what's best for me might look different from my perspective than from yours. I value my independence, Melissa. My connections to my friends and community here. "And you don't value being close to your grandchildren?" she countered, immediately deploying the most effective emotional weapon in her arsenal. "I value that." "Enormously," I replied, feeling a genuine pang at the thought of Sophie, Tyler, and Emma. "But proximity doesn't guarantee connection, does it? I haven't seen them in months, despite living only 30 minutes away." Melissa had the grace to look momentarily discomfited before rallying. "That was different. We were all upset after Thanksgiving, but that's behind us now, and we want you to be part of our daily lives." The timing of this renewed desire for closeness, coinciding exactly with my mention of selling the house, was too convenient to be coincidental. But I merely nodded, keeping my thoughts to myself. "I appreciate that," I said, "and I'll certainly consider all my options carefully before making any final decisions." Melissa seemed satisfied with this apparent concession, interpreting it as a sign that I remained manipulable. She relaxed visibly, even offering to help prepare a vegetable tray for dinner, chatting about the children's activities and school achievements as if the previous tension had never existed. I allowed her this illusion of normalcy, responding with appropriate grandmotherly interest, while my mind continued refining the details of tomorrow's more significant confrontation. The documents I had signed today were just the foundation, establishing my legal competence and creating a record of my clear decision-making capacity. Tomorrow would bring the actual protective measures that would secure my assets and independence permanently. When Peter returned with the children an hour later, the atmosphere had lightened considerably. Melissa had clearly communicated to him that I remained compliant and amenable to their influence, and he had relaxed his vigilance accordingly. He suggested ordering pizza for dinner, A little celebration of new beginnings, Mom. And I agreed readily, watching as he inserted himself back into the role of thoughtful, supportive son. Dinner was almost pleasant, with the children's natural exuberance creating a buffer against the underlying tension. Sophie regaled us with elaborate stories about her third-grade classroom dramas. Tyler, usually taciturn, opened up about his interest in astronomy, reminding me of Frank, who had loved to identify constellations on our camping trips decades ago. Even Emma, normally guarded and absorbed in typical teenage self-interest, engaged warmly, asking about old photo albums and whether certain family heirlooms might be available when the house was cleared out. I always loved that old writing. "Desk in your bedroom, Grandma," she said between bites of pizza. "The one with all the little drawers and cubby holes." Frank brought that back from his grandfather's farm in Ohio, I told her, smiling at the memory. Restored it himself in the garage over one long winter. "If you're downsizing," Emma continued, "you probably won't have room for it in a condo." Peter and Melissa exchanged quick glances, pleased no doubt that Emma was unwittingly supporting their narrative about my need to divest myself of possessions. "That's thoughtful of you to consider, Emma," I said. "When the time comes to, distribute things, I'll keep your interest in mind." "We should start an inventory," Melissa suggested with poorly disguised eagerness. "Make lists of what you want to keep, what to give to family, what to sell or donate." "There's no rush," I countered mildly. "The sale could take months to complete, and I'll need my furniture until then." "But it's never too early to plan," Peter insisted. "In fact, maybe tomorrow while you're meeting with Sarah, Melissa and I could start cataloging some of the larger pieces. Just to get ahead, start. The transparent attempt to inventory my assets, or possibly to search for financial documents and valuables, might have been amusing if it weren't so calculating." I smiled and nodded noncommittally, neither agreeing to nor rejecting the suggestion. After dinner, as Peter and Melissa cleared the table with ostentatious helpfulness, my phone buzzed with a text from Grace. "Everything in place for tomorrow. Judge Henderson signed the emergency protective order based on the recordings and affidavits. Sarah will bring the full package at 10. Are you still comfortable with the confrontation approach?" I stepped away from the family activity, ostensibly, to rest my knee and typed back, "Absolutely. No more hiding, no more pretending. Tomorrow, we end this charade once and for all." Grace's response was immediate. "I'll be there too. Don't let them suspect anything tonight." I rejoined the family in the living room, where Peter had suggested a board game, another performance of wholesome family togetherness that rang increasingly hollow as the evening progressed. I participated with appropriate grandmotherly enthusiasm, laughing at the right moments, offering gentle guidance to Sophie, who struggled with the rules, all while mentally reviewing the sequence of events that would unfold tomorrow morning. By 9 p.m., I was genuinely exhausted from maintaining my facade of uninformed compliance. I excused myself to bed, insisting over Peter and Melissa's protests that I was perfectly capable of preparing the basement sofa myself. "Nonsense, Mom," Peter declared with exaggerated concern. "You take your regular bedroom tonight. I'll sleep in the basement. You need your rest before the big meeting tomorrow." The sudden role reversal was telling. Now that I appeared to be cooperating with their plans, my comfort had become a priority again. I recognized the manipulation for what it was, but accepted the offer with apparent gratitude. "That's very thoughtful, Peter. I would sleep better in my own bed." Melissa nodded approvingly, no doubt pleased by this evidence that I remained susceptible to their influence. "I'll bring you some chamomile tea. It always helps me sleep before important days." As I prepared for bed in the privacy of my own room, I reflected on how quickly one becomes adept at deception when necessary. In less than 24 hours, I had transformed from a trusting mother blindsided by betrayal to a strategic actor in a family drama of my own orchestration. The realization was both empowering and profoundly sad. I accepted Melissa's tea with appropriate thanks, waiting until she left before pouring it down the bathroom sink. I trusted nothing they offered me now, particularly not on the eve of a meeting that could secure my financial independence from their machinations. From the hallway, I could hear their hushed voices as they prepared the children for bed in the guest rooms, the occasional burst of Sophie's laughter, a poignant reminder of what was at stake. The grandchildren were innocent participants in this painful charade, unaware of the currents of manipulation and counter-manipulation flowing beneath the surface of our family gathering. I settled into bed with a book I had no intention of reading, waiting until the house grew quiet. Around 11 p.m., I crept to my bedroom door and opened it a crack, listening intently. The muffled sounds of a television came from the living room where Peter and Melissa were presumably still awake, perhaps finalizing their strategy for tomorrow. Moving silently, I retrieved my cell phone from the nightstand and composed a final message to Grace. "House quiet now. Everything proceeding as planned. I'll see you at 9:45 tomorrow." Her reply came seconds later. "Officer Williams confirmed for 10:15 arrival. Rest well. Tomorrow you reclaim your life." I slipped back into bed, switching off the lamp and lying in the darkness. Despite the tension and upcoming confrontation, I felt strangely peaceful. Tomorrow would be difficult, perhaps the most painful day of my relationship with my son. But it would also be clarifying, a bright line between what had been and what would be. As I drifted toward sleep, I thought of Frank and wondered what he would make of all this. He had always seen Peter more clearly than I had recognized the entitlement taking root even in our son's childhood. "Love doesn't mean giving them everything they want," he used to say. "Sometimes it means standing firm when they push against the boundaries." I had forgotten that wisdom in the years after Frank's death, had confused indulgence with love, financial support with maternal care. Tomorrow would mark the end of that confusion for all of us. My last thought before sleep claimed me was not of anger or betrayal, but of hope. Hope that somewhere beneath the calculating adult Peter had become, some remnant of the son I had raised still existed. Hope that after the necessary pain of confrontation might come, eventually, the possibility of a healthier relationship built on respect rather than exploitation. It was a slim hope, perhaps even a foolish one. But it was enough to carry me into sleep, preparing for the battle that would begin with the morning light. I woke at dawn, a lifetime of early rising for school impossible to break even in retirement. For a moment, the familiar comfort of my bedroom disoriented me. The events of yesterday seemed like a bad dream until reality came rushing back. My son and his wife had plotted to have me declared incompetent. They'd made me sleep in the basement of my own home, and today I would confront them with the truth. The house was still quiet as I showered and dressed with particular care, choosing a tailored navy pantsuit I usually reserved for school board meetings and important occasions. If today was to be a battle, I would face it with dignity and strength, not in a housecoat and slippers as they might expect. In the kitchen, I prepared coffee and a light breakfast, moving with deliberate purpose. The clock on the microwave read 7:15 hour, nearly 3 hours until Sarah would arrive with the legal documents and protective measures Grace had arranged. 3 hours to maintain the charade of compliance, to keep Peter and Melissa believing their scheme was working. Sophie padded into the kitchen first, her hair tousled from sleep, still in her butterfly pajamas. "Morning, Grandma," she yawned, climbing onto a stool at the counter. "You look fancy." I smiled, pouring her a glass of orange juice. "I have an important meeting today, remember? About selling the house." She nodded, her expression turning solemn. "Will you still be my grandma if you don't live here anymore?" The innocent question pierced straight through my defenses. "Oh, Sophie," I said, coming around the counter to hug her. "I'll always be your grandma, no matter where I live. That's one thing that can never, ever change." She seemed satisfied with this answer, returning to her juice as Tyler appeared, followed shortly by Emma, who immediately noticed my formal attire. "You really are serious about selling, aren't you?" she asked, her shrewd teenage gaze assessing me. "This isn't just grandma in a house dress making pancakes day." "Yes, I'm serious," I replied, appreciating her perceptiveness. "Some decisions can't be made in a house dress." Emma nodded, something like respect flickering in her expression. Of all the grandchildren, she was the most like Frank, observant, thoughtful, not easily swayed by appearances. Peter and Melissa arrived last, already dressed and alert despite the early hour. Peter's eyebrows rose at my formal attire, while Melissa's gaze sharpened with sudden wariness. "You're up early, Mom," Peter commented, helping himself to coffee. "And dressed for?" "My meeting with Sarah," I reminded him, "about selling the house. It's at 10. He exchanged a quick look with Melissa. "Right, of course. But that's nearly 3 hours from now." I shrugged, passing him the cream. "Old habits. 35 years of teaching early morning classes means I've never learned to sleep in." This seemed to satisfy him, and the next 2 hours passed in a strange facsimile of family harmony. Melissa helped the children with their breakfast. Peter read news headlines from his phone, and I maintained calm conversation while mentally rehearsing what was to come. At 9:30, Peter announced he needed to make some work calls before Sarah arrived. "Just a few client check-ins," he explained, retreating to the guest room with his laptop. Melissa took the opportunity to corner me in the kitchen under the pretense of helping clean up. "Barbara," she began, her voice low and confidential, "before your realtor gets here, we should discuss how you want to handle the proceeds from the sale." "Proceed?" I echoed innocently, wiping down the countertop. "Well, it's a significant asset," she continued. "You'll want to make sure it's properly managed for your long-term care needs." The implication was clear. They should manage the money, not me. I nodded thoughtfully. "That's certainly something to consider. I'll want to discuss options with my financial advisor." A flicker of alarm crossed her face. "You have a financial advisor? Since when?" "Since Frank died," I replied truthfully. "Martin Hughes at Ridgemont Financial. He's been very helpful with my retirement planning." This was clearly news to her, and unwelcome news at that. Another professional in my life meant another potential obstacle to their plans for controlling my assets. "Well," she recovered quickly, "Peter has extensive experience with investment strategy. It might make sense to consolidate your advising to keep everything in the family." "I'll certainly consider it," I said with a bland smile that revealed nothing of my true thoughts. Family is important. At 9:40, I excused myself to freshen up before Sarah's arrival, actually retreating to my bedroom to send a final text to Grace. "Everything proceeding as planned. Are you and Officer Williams on schedule?" Her reply came immediately. "We're 5 minutes out. Sarah is already parked down the street. Stay calm. We've got this." I took a deep breath, studying my reflection in the mirror. The woman who looked back at me was not the compliant, easily manipulated mother Peter had come to expect. Her eyes were clear and determined, her posture straight despite the arthritis in her knees. She looked like someone who commanded a classroom for decades, who raised a child alone after being widowed, who was nobody's victim. At exactly 9:55, the doorbell rang. Peter materialized from the guest room with remarkable speed, clearly intent on being present from the start of Sarah's visit. I moved at a deliberately slower pace, allowing him to reach the door first. "Sarah, welcome back," he greeted effusively. "We're all excited to move forward with the listing." "Thank you, Mr. Mitchell," Sarah replied with professional courtesy, stepping inside with her leather portfolio and a larger document case than yesterday. "Is your mother available?" "Right here," I said, entering the foyer. "Good morning, Sarah. Shall we use the dining room again?" Sarah nodded, her expression revealing nothing of what was to come. "That would be perfect. I have quite a few documents for us to review today." "I've cleared my schedule completely," Peter announced, following us to the dining room. "No distractions while we get Mom's future secured." Melissa appeared as if summoned, ushering the children toward the back door. "I'm taking the kids to the park so you can focus," she explained with exaggerated thoughtfulness. "We'll be back in an hour or so." I nodded my agreement, secretly relieved that the children would be spared witnessing what was about to unfold. Once they departed, Sarah began removing documents from her portfolio, while Peter positioned himself directly beside me, clearly intent on monitoring every detail. "Before we begin," Sarah said calmly, "I should mention that Mrs. Mitchell requested some additional parties join us this morning." Peter's head snapped up. "Additional parties? What additional parties?" As if on cue, the doorbell rang again. "That would be them now," Sarah noted, her professional demeanor never wavering. "Perhaps you could get the door, Mr. Mitchell?" Confusion and alarm battled on Peter's face. He hesitated, looking from Sarah to me with growing suspicion. "Mom, what's going on here? What additional parties?" "Why don't you answer the door and find out?" I suggested mildly. With visible reluctance, Peter went to the foyer. I heard the door open, followed by his startled exclamation, "Grace, what are you doing here?" Grace's voice carried clearly from the entryway. "I'm here at Barbara's request, Peter, and this is Officer Williams from the Elder Protection Unit." "Elder Protection? What is this?" "Mom!" Peter's voice rose sharply as he strode back into the dining room, followed by Grace and a uniformed police officer. "What the hell is going on?" I met his gaze steadily. "Please sit down, Peter. We have a lot to discuss. I'm not sitting anywhere until someone explains what this is about," he insisted, his face flushing with anger and alarm. Officer Williams stepped forward, her manner calm but authoritative. "Sir, please take a seat. Mrs. Mitchell has some concerns she wishes to address in a safe environment." Safe environment? In her own home? This is ridiculous. Peter's voice rose further. "Mom, tell them this is a mistake." "It's no mistake," I said quietly. "Please sit down, Peter. This will be easier if you cooperate." Something in my tone must have penetrated his indignation. He sank slowly into a chair, eyes darting between the four of us. "Mrs. Mitchell," Sarah began, her role now shifting from pretend realtor to legal representative. "Would you like to explain to your son why we're all here today?" I took a deep breath, the moment of confrontation finally at hand. "Peter, I overheard your conversation with Melissa 2 nights ago in the kitchen about having me declared incompetent, about getting power of attorney over my finances, about taking my house." The color drained from his face. "You... what?" "I don't know what you're talking about." "Please don't lie to me," I said, my voice steady despite the pain lancing through my heart. "I heard everything. About Dr. Hendricks owing you a favor after the malpractice case, about documenting incidents of memory slippage, about pushing me into Sunny Pines so you could control my assets." Peter's expression cycled rapidly through shock, denial, and calculation before settling on injured innocence. "Mom, you misunderstood. We were discussing worst-case scenarios, that's all. Planning for your future care if your health declined." Grace snorted audibly at this transparent falsehood, but I raised a hand to quiet her. "I didn't misunderstand anything," I continued. "You specifically mentioned my Thanksgiving incident with the car keys as evidence of cognitive decline, keys that were in my hand while I was looking for them." "That was a joke," Peter protested weakly. "Melissa was just teasing about that." "A joke that you suggested documenting for legal proceedings," I replied. "Not very funny from where I'm sitting." Officer Williams cleared her throat. "Mr. Mitchell, I should inform you that planning to have someone declared incompetent under false pretenses for financial gain constitutes attempted elder abuse under state law." Peter's face hardened. "This is absurd. You have no proof of any plans." "It's my mother's word against mine. And frankly, if she's hiding in stairwells, eavesdropping on private conversations, that actually supports concerns about her behavior. I had anticipated this defense. With a nod to Grace, I reached for my phone and played the recording I'd made that first night in the basement. Peter and Melissa's voices crystal clear as they discussed having me declared incompetent. Their laughter about my supposed memory issues, their explicit statements about wanting my house while I was drowning in debt. As the recording played, Peter's face went through another transformation. Disbelief giving way to anger, and then, most tellingly, to calculation. He was already formulating his next move, his next manipulation. When the recording ended, the silence in the dining room was absolute. "That's taken out of context," he finally said, but the protest sounded hollow even to my ears. "There is no context that makes this acceptable," Grace replied sharply. "You were explicitly planning to fraudulently seize control of your mother's assets." Peter switched tactics, turning to me with wounded eyes. "Mom, I can't believe you'd do this. Recording private conversations, bringing in police, we're family. Whatever misunderstanding has happened here, we should handle it privately. Like, family." The appeal to family loyalty, his final manipulation, landed with painful familiarity. How many times had I accepted mistreatment under that same banner? How many boundaries had I allowed to be crossed in the name of family? "Yes, we are family," I agreed, my voice softening despite myself. "Which is why your betrayal cuts so deeply. Families should protect each other, not exploit each other." "I was trying to protect you," he insisted, leaning forward earnestly. "You're alone in this big house, getting older, becoming forgetful." "I am not becoming forgetful," I interrupted firmly. "I scored in the 95th percentile on a cognitive assessment administered by an independent neurologist yesterday. The documents Sarah brought aren't real estate listings. They're legal protections establishing my competence and securing my assets." Peter's gaze darted to the papers spread across the table, realization dawning. "You tricked us," he said slowly. "All that talk about selling the house, about downsizing." "Yes," I acknowledged without apology. "I needed to understand the full extent of your plans, and I needed time to put protections in place." "What kind of protections?" he demanded, wariness replacing his wounded act. Sarah spoke up, her professional tone unwavering. "Mrs. Mitchell has established an irrevocable trust for her assets, with a corporate fiduciary as trustee. She has executed new power of attorney documents specifically excluding you and your wife from any decision-making role in her financial or medical affairs. Additionally, she has filed for an elder abuse protective order, which Officer Williams is here to serve." "A protective order? Against me?" Peter's voice rose in genuine shock. "Your own son?" "Against you and Melissa," I confirmed quietly. "It prohibits you from attempting to interfere with my finances, from making false claims about my competence, and from removing anything from my property without explicit written permission." Peter stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "This is insane. You can't be serious. After everything we've done for you." "Everything you've done for me?" I repeated, incredulity temporarily overcoming my calm resolve. "Peter, in the past 8 years since your father died, you've borrowed over $200,000 that you've never repaid. You've pressured me to co-sign loans, fund business ventures, pay for private schools and renovations. You've used access to my grandchildren as emotional leverage when I've refused your financial demands." He flinched as if struck. "That's not fair. We've included you in our lives, invited you to family events. When was the last time you called me just to check how I was doing?" I asked, echoing the question I'd asked myself countless times during the months of silence after Thanksgiving. "When did you last remember my birthday without being reminded? When have you ever put my needs above your financial interests?" The questions hung in the air between us, unanswerable because we both knew the truth. Officer Williams stepped forward, extending a document. Mr. Mitchell, this is the temporary protective order issued by Judge Henderson. It will be in effect for 30 days, after which there will be a hearing to determine if it should be made permanent. Peter stared at the document without taking it. And if I refuse to accept this? Then I note your refusal in my report and inform you that violating the order constitutes a criminal offense, Officer Williams replied calmly. The order is in effect whether you physically accept the paperwork or not. With visible reluctance, Peter finally took the document, his hand shaking slightly as he scanned its contents. You're banning me from my own mother's house? He asked incredulously. Prohibiting me from discussing financial matters with her? The order specifically prohibits coercive financial discussions and attempts to unduly influence Mrs. Mitchell's financial decisions, Officer Williams clarified. Normal family conversations are not restricted, provided they are respectful and non-manipulative. Peter turned to me, anger and disbelief warring in his expression. You're choosing this, legal, documents and restraining orders, over working things out as a family? Over your own son? The question pierced straight to my heart. For a moment, I wavered. Despite everything, this was my child, the baby I had cradled, the boy I had raised, the man I had sacrificed for repeatedly. The maternal instinct to protect and forgive, to maintain connection at any cost, surged powerfully. But Grace's steady presence beside me and the memory of Peter and Melissa's cold laughter as they plotted to strip me of my autonomy steadied my resolve. I'm choosing to protect myself, I said quietly, because you've shown me that you won't. A car door slammed outside, signaling Melissa's return with the children. Peter's expression shifted into panic. You can't do this in front of the kids, he hissed. They don't need to see their father served with a restraining order. I nodded to Officer Williams, who moved toward the front door. Officer Williams will explain the situation to Melissa privately on the porch, I assured him. The children don't need to be involved in adult matters. Relief flickered briefly across Peter's face before hardening again into anger. So, what happens now? You've made your point with all this legal theater. Are we supposed to just pretend this never happened? Go back to Sunday dinners and birthday parties? Sarah began gathering her documents while Grace moved to stand supportively beside me. What happens now, I said, is that you and Melissa leave my house today. You take time to reflect on your actions and your choices, if and when you're ready, to build a relationship based on respect rather than financial exploitation. We can talk about moving forward. And the grandchildren? He asked, his voice tight. Are you punishing them too? Cutting them out of your life to spite us? The manipulation was so transparent, so predictable that I almost pitied him for its desperation. I would never punish the children for their parents' actions, I replied steadily. I've arranged with Grace to establish a legal visitation schedule if necessary. Emma, Tyler, and Sophie are welcome in my home anytime, regardless of what happens between us. The front door opened, and we heard Officer Williams's calm, professional voice explaining the situation to Melissa, whose responses quickly rose in volume and indignation. The children remained outside, presumably instructed to wait in the car. Peter gathered the protective order documents with shaking hands, his face a mask of barely contained fury and humiliation. You'll regret this, he said quietly. When you're truly alone. When you really do need help someday, you'll remember that you chose legal strangers over your own family. I met his gaze directly, refusing to be intimidated. No, Peter, if that day comes, I'll remember that I chose to value myself enough to require basic respect. I'll remember that genuine love doesn't come with financial demands attached. The front door slammed as Melissa stormed into the house, her face flushed with anger. Barbara, have you lost your mind? A protective order? Police officers questioning me in front of the entire neighborhood? Mrs. Mitchell, Officer Williams corrected, following her inside. And please lower your voice. This situation can be handled with dignity if you choose to cooperate. Melissa looked frantically between Peter and me, seeking explanation or direction. What is happening? Peter? We're leaving, he said flatly. Apparently, Mom values her house more than her relationship with her son. The deliberate mischaracterization stung, but I refused to engage with it. You have 30 minutes to collect your belongings, I said instead. Officer Williams will remain to ensure the process goes smoothly. 30 minutes? Melissa echoed, incredulously. To pack for 3 children? You managed to pack overnight bags for an unexpected fumigation easily enough, I pointed out. Surely you can manage to repack those same bags now. Grace suppressed a smile at this observation while Sarah discreetly checked her watch. This is ridiculous, Melissa sputtered. We came here to help you, to make sure you were properly taken care of. By having me declared incompetent and seizing control of my assets? I asked mildly. Such selfless concern. Melissa's face flushed deeper. You've clearly been influenced by your so-called friends here. The Barbara I know would never turn against her family like this. The Barbara you know, I replied quietly, has been rediscovering her backbone after years of allowing herself to be manipulated through guilt and emotional blackmail. She's not turning against family, she's turning toward self-respect. Officer Williams stepped forward, her manner firm but not unkind. Mrs. Mitchell, Mr. Mitchell, I suggest you focus on gathering your belongings within the allotted time. Arguments will only delay your departure. With a final glare, Melissa stalked, off toward the guest rooms, Peter following after a moment's hesitation. Their muffled but heated conversation drifted down the hallway as they began collecting their things. Are you all right? Grace asked softly, placing a supportive hand on my arm. I nodded, though in truth I felt lightheaded, my heart racing, with the stress of confrontation. I just need to sit down for a moment. Sarah pulled out a chair for me, while Grace poured a glass of water from the dining room pitcher. The enormity of what had just transpired was beginning to sink in. I had severed, perhaps permanently, the relationship with my only child. I had chosen legal protection over emotional appeasement, clear boundaries over toxic connection. You did the right thing, Grace assured me, reading my expression accurately. What they were planning was criminal, Barbara. Actual prosecutable elder abuse. I know, I said, sipping the water, but he's still my son. A son who was willing to have you declared incompetent to get his hands on your house, she reminded me gently. Love doesn't require you to be a doormat. From the back of the house came the sounds of hurried packing, drawers opening and closing, Melissa's sharp instructions to Peter. Officer Williams positioned herself in the hallway, maintaining a professional presence without direct interference. What about the children? I asked quietly. How do I explain this to them? With age-appropriate honesty, Grace advised. They don't need to know the legal details, but they deserve to know that sometimes adults disagree in ways that require space and boundaries. Sarah finished organizing her documents, securing them in her portfolio. All the legal protections are now in place, she assured me. The trust documents are filed, the power of attorney designation has been updated with your bank and medical providers, and the protective order is in effect. If they attempt to challenge your competency, they'll face an uphill battle against substantial documented evidence. I thanked her, grateful for the efficiency with which Grace's firm had moved to secure my position. The sound of the front door opening interrupted our conversation. Apparently, Peter and Melissa had decided to load their belongings into the car before bringing the children inside. Taking advantage of their temporary absence, I moved to the kitchen to prepare myself for the hardest part of this confrontation, saying goodbye to Emma, Tyler, and Sophie without burdening them with adult conflicts or making them feel caught. In the middle, I heard the front door open again, followed by Sophie's excited voice calling, "Grandma, Dad says we have to leave right away. Can I take the cookies you made for the drive?" Composing myself, I emerged from the kitchen with a smile I hoped looked more genuine than it felt. "Of course you can, sweetheart. Let me wrap some up for you." Sophie bounded into the kitchen while Emma and Tyler lingered in the doorway, their expressions confused and wary. They had clearly picked up on the tension, even if they didn't understand its source. "Why is there a police officer here?" Tyler asked bluntly. "Did something bad happen?" Before I could answer, Peter appeared behind them, his face tight with suppressed emotion. "The officer is just helping Grandma with some paperwork," he said, placing a hand on Tyler's shoulder. "Nothing for you to worry about." The evasion was technically true but deliberately misleading. I met Peter's gaze over the children's heads, silently communicating that I wouldn't contradict his explanation in front of them, but I wouldn't perpetuate deceptions either. "Your dad's right that you don't need to worry," I told Tyler, "but the officer is actually here because Grandma needed some help making sure her house and property stay safe." Emma, perceptive as always, narrowed her eyes. "Safe from what?" "From people who might not respect Grandma's right to make her own decisions," I said carefully, watching Peter's jaw tighten at this simplified but accurate description. "Like, those scammers who call old people?" Tyler asked innocently. Peter's hand on his shoulder tightened visibly. "Something like that. Now go help your mother finish loading the car. We need to leave soon." As the younger children moved away, Emma lingered, her gaze moving between her father and me with troubled awareness. "This isn't about scammers, is it?" she asked quietly. "It's about you and Dad fighting." I sighed, recognizing that this intelligent 16-year-old deserved more honesty than Peter's evasions. "Your father and I have a disagreement about my future living arrangements and financial decisions," I explained, choosing my words carefully. "Sometimes adults need professional help to resolve such disagreements." "Like divorce lawyers?" she pressed, showing the insight that had always reminded me of Frank. "Similar in some ways," I acknowledged. "But this doesn't change anything between you and me, Emma. You and your siblings are always welcome here, regardless of what's happening between the adults." Peter stepped forward, his patience visibly fraying. "Emma, go to the car. Now." She hesitated, looking torn between obedience and concern. "Will we still be able to visit Grandma?" "We'll discuss that later," Peter replied in a tone that suggested the discussion would not be favorable. "Right now, we need to leave." I reached for Emma's hand, squeezing it gently. "Whatever happens, you can always call me. Anytime. Remember that?" She nodded, returning the squeeze before reluctantly following her father's directive. As she walked away, I felt a sharp pang of grief for the collateral damage this conflict would inevitably cause. The children were innocent in this mess, yet they would suffer consequences regardless. Melissa appeared from the hallway with the last of their bags, her expression coldly furious. "We're ready," she announced, not looking directly at me. "Officer." Williams stepped forward. "Before you leave, I need to remind you both of the terms of the protective order. You are prohibited from attempting to remove any property from this residence without Mrs. Mitchell's explicit written permission. You are prohibited from making any claims about Mrs. Mitchell's competence to financial institutions, medical providers, or legal authorities. You are prohibited from engaging in coercive financial discussions or attempting to unduly influence Mrs. Mitchell's financial decisions." "We understand," Peter said stiffly. "Can we go now?" Officer Williams nodded. "Yes, but I want to be clear. Violation of this order can result in criminal charges. It's not just a piece of paper. It's a legal directive with real consequences." Melissa muttered something under her breath that I couldn't quite catch but sounded distinctly unflattering. Peter placed a restraining hand on her arm, clearly wanting to depart without further escalation. Sophie darted back from the kitchen, clutching the package of cookies I'd wrapped for her. "Bye, Grandma. Thanks for letting us stay over. Next. Time, can I sleep in the basement? It looked like a cool fort down there." The innocent comment struck me with unexpected force. The contrast between Sophie's adventure-seeking view of the basement and the reality of her parents making their elderly mother sleep there with no bathroom access. I bent to hug her, breathing in the sweet scent of her hair. "We'll see, sweetheart. You be good, okay? I love you very much." "Love you too," she replied cheerfully, oblivious to the tension surrounding her. Tyler gave me an awkward wave. Caught in that preteen phase where hugs from grandmothers were suspect. "Bye, Grandma. Thanks for the pancakes." Emma was last, stepping forward to embrace me tightly. "I'll call you," she whispered in my ear. "Don't worry about us." The role reversal, my granddaughter attempting to reassure me rather than the other way around, brought tears to my eyes. I hugged her back, whispering, "I'm always here for you. Always." And then they were gone, ushered out by Peter and Melissa, who departed without a backward glance or word of farewell. The front door closed with a finality that echoed through the suddenly quiet house. Officer Williams remained a few minutes longer, completing her paperwork and ensuring I was comfortable with the proceedings. "If they attempt to contact you in violation of the order, call me directly," she instructed, handing me her card. "Don't hesitate, even if it seems minor." After she left, only Grace remained, watching me with concern as I sank onto the living room sofa, suddenly exhausted. "That was the hardest thing I've ever done," I admitted, my voice catching. Grace sat beside me, her presence steadying. "I know, but it was also one of the bravest." We sat in silence for a moment, the emptiness of the house pressing in around us. Finally, I voiced the fear that had been growing since the moment Peter and Melissa drove away. What if I've just destroyed my relationship with my only son forever? What if the children grow up hating me because of this? Grace considered the question with the thoughtfulness that had made her such an effective attorney. Relationships based on exploitation aren't real relationships, Barbara. They're just transactions disguised as connection. What you've done is create the possibility for something healthier, if Peter is willing to meet you there. "And if he isn't?" I asked, quietly. "Then you've still protected yourself from abuse," she replied simply, "and shown your grandchildren what it looks like when a woman values herself enough to set boundaries. That's a powerful legacy, no matter what happens next." I nodded, trying to absorb this perspective. The confrontation was over, but the real work, rebuilding my life on new terms, navigating the aftermath of this family rupture, was just beginning. "What happens now?" I asked, not really expecting an answer. Grace smiled gently. "Now you rest. You've fought a battle today. Tomorrow, we start planning your future, one where you're the author of your own story, not a character in someone else's." As she spoke, I glanced around my living room, the familiar furniture, the photos on the walls, the home that Peter and Melissa had coveted enough to plot against me. For the first time since overhearing their midnight conversation, I felt something other than betrayal and pain. I felt free. Free from the obligation to sacrifice my security for Peter's financial mistakes. Free from the emotional manipulation that had kept me tethered to toxic patterns. Free to create boundaries that protected my well-being rather than eroding it. They had made me sleep in the basement, treating me as less than welcome in my own home. But I had emerged stronger, with clearer vision and firmer resolve than I'd possessed in years. Whatever came next, reconciliation or permanent estrangement, forgiveness or necessary distance, I would face it on my own terms, with my dignity and autonomy intact. And that, I realized, was a victory worth celebrating, even amid the grief of what had been lost. 3 months passed in a strange, unsettled quiet. The protective order remained in effect, extended by a judge after a hearing where Peter and Melissa failed to appear. My house, once invaded by their scheming, returned to being solely mine again, each room reclaimed through small rituals of ownership. I rearranged furniture, planted new flowers in the garden, and finally converted the basement into a proper guest suite with a bathroom, as if exercising the memory of that first night. The hardest part was the grandchildren. As I'd feared, Peter and Melissa initially prevented any contact, ignoring my calls and texts. But Emma, resourceful and determined, managed to establish a secret line of communication, calling from friends' phones, sending emails from school accounts, keeping me connected to all 3 children despite her parents' efforts. Dad's still really angry, she reported during one such call. He and Mom talk about you when they think we're not listening, but they stop when we come into the room. That's probably for the best, I told her, heart aching for the position she was in. Adult disagreements should stay between adults. Sophie cried on your birthday because we couldn't call you, she confided. Tyler pretends he doesn't care, but I found him looking at old photos from when we used to visit. Each update was both a comfort and a wound. I was grateful for the continued connection, but devastated by the price the children were paying. For a conflict not of their making. Spring arrived with unexpected developments. First came a formal letter from an attorney representing Peter and Melissa, demanding the return of personal items they claimed had been unfairly retained during their hasty departure, including, absurdly, the antique writing desk Emma had admired, which had been in my family for 3 generations. Grace advised a brief, factual response. No items belonging to Peter and Melissa Mitchell remain in Barbara Mitchell's residence. The antique desk referenced was purchased by Frank Mitchell in 1985 and has never been the property of the claimants. There was no further correspondence about the desk. The second development was more consequential. On a warm April morning, I answered a knock at my door to find Emma standing on the porch, school backpack slung over her shoulder, expression a mix of defiance and uncertainty. "Emma!" I exclaimed, instinctively checking the street behind her for Peter's car. "What are you doing here? Does your father know where you are?" She shook her head, stepping inside as I ushered her in. "I took the bus after school. Dad and Mom are at some business dinner until late." She hesitated, then added, "I needed to talk to you, in person." Over hot chocolate at the kitchen table. Some grandmotherly traditions remain constant, even in crisis. Emma revealed why she'd risked her parents' anger to see me. "They're getting divorced, Grandma," she said bluntly. "Dad moved out last week. They told us it was temporary and just to give everyone space. But I heard Mom talking to her sister. It's real." I absorbed this news with mixed emotions. Sadness for the children facing family upheaval, but not surprise at the marriage's collapse. Relationships built on materialism and manipulation rarely withstand serious financial stress. "How are you feeling about it?" I asked, careful not to inject my own complicated feelings about Peter into the conversation. Emma shrugged with studied, teenage nonchalance that didn't quite hide her pain. "It's been coming for a while. They fight all the time about money. Dad's restaurant is closing. Another temporary thing that isn't really temporary. Mom says he made bad investments. The pieces fell into place. Their desperate attempt to gain control of my assets had likely been a last-ditch effort to solve mounting financial problems. Not that understanding their motivation excused their behavior. But that's not really why I came," Emma continued, fidgeting with her mug. "Dad called me last night. He was different. Quiet. He asked if I still talk to you." My heart stuttered. "What did you tell him?" "The truth," she admitted. "I was mad about everything." I said, Of course I still talk to you. You're my grandmother, and it was stupid and unfair that they tried to keep us apart because of adult problems. I could almost picture Peter on the receiving end of his daughter's righteous teenage indignation. How did he respond? Emma's expression softened slightly. He didn't get mad like I expected. He just asked if you were okay. Then he said he'd been doing a lot of thinking lately. Thinking about what? I asked cautiously. About mistakes. Priorities, stuff like that. She glanced up, her eyes, so like Frank's, suddenly earnest. I think he might want to talk to you, Grandma, like to apologize or something. I nodded slowly, not willing to either encourage or discourage such a possibility. If he reaches out, I'll listen. That's all I can promise right now. That seemed to satisfy her. We spent the remaining hour before her bus talking about normal things, her advanced placement classes, Tyler's new obsession with astronomy, Sophie's starring role in the school play. For those brief moments, the rift in our family receded to the background, allowing space for simpler connections. As I hugged her goodbye at the bus stop, Emma whispered, "Don't tell Dad I came. I don't want to make things worse." "Your visit stays between us," I promised. "But Emma, be careful about keeping too many secrets. It's a heavy burden for someone your age." She smiled wryly. "I'm practically 17, Grandma. Not exactly a kid anymore." I watched until the bus disappeared around the corner, carrying this remarkable young woman who navigated family fractures with more grace than most adults managed. Whatever Peter's failings as a son, he and Melissa had somehow raised children with strong moral compasses and emotional intelligence, perhaps the one truly successful joint venture of their marriage. The call came exactly 1 week later. I was deadheading roses in the front garden when my phone rang with Peter's name on the screen. For a moment, I simply stared at it, heart racing with a jumble of emotions. Hope, wariness, lingering anger, maternal love that never fully disappears. No matter the circumstances, finally I answered. "Hello, Peter." "Mom." His voice sounded different, subdued, without the confident edge I'd grown accustomed to. "Is this a good time to talk?" "I'm just gardening," I replied. "What's on your mind?" A deep breath, audible, through the connection. "I was wondering if I could come by sometime, to talk in person. There are some things I need to say that shouldn't be said over the phone." I considered my response carefully. The protective order had been lifted after its expiration when I chose not to pursue a permanent one. But emotional boundaries remained, necessary. "I'd be willing to meet," I said finally. "But at a neutral location, not my home. The coffee shop on Elm Street, perhaps." He accepted this condition without protest, the first indication that this might be a different kind of conversation than our last. We set a time for the following afternoon, and I spent the intervening hours preparing myself for whatever might come, trying to balance cautious hope against the need for continued self-protection. The Peter who arrived at Meadowlark Coffee the next day bore little resemblance to the polished, confident man who had orchestrated plans against me months earlier. He looked thinner, his designer clothes replaced by simple jeans and a button-down shirt that needed ironing. Most noticeably, his expression lacked the calculated charm that had been his default in difficult situations. "Thanks for meeting me," he said simply, sliding into the booth across from me. I nodded, waiting rather than rushing to fill the uncomfortable silence between us. This conversation would unfold on terms other than his for once. After ordering coffee, Peter got straight to the point. "I owe you an apology, Mom, not just for what happened that weekend, but for years of treating you as a financial resource rather than as my mother." The directness surprised me. I'd expected excuses, minimization, perhaps attempts to reframe his actions in a more favorable light. Instead, he offered unvarnished acknowledgement. "What brought about this realization?" I asked, genuinely curious. He looked down at his coffee. A lot of things. The divorce, the business failing, having to move into a one-bedroom apartment. A rueful smile touched his lips. Turns out when you spend your life focusing on appearances and acquisitions, everything falls apart pretty quickly once the money runs out. I'm sorry about the divorce, I said, and meant it. Whatever my feelings about Melissa's participation, in the scheme against me, divorce was painful for everyone involved, especially the children. Peter nodded his thanks. It's been hard, but necessary. We brought out the worst in each other. The materialism, the status obsession. I can see that now. And the children? I asked. My primary concern as always. They're adjusting. Better than I expected, honestly. Emma's been incredible with the younger ones. He hesitated, then added, They miss you. All of them. I shouldn't have kept them from you. That was cruel, using them as leverage. The simple acknowledgement brought unexpected tears to my eyes. Yes, I agreed quietly. It was. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of months of estrangement pressing between us. Finally, Peter spoke again. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Mom. What I did, what Melissa and I planned, it was inexcusable. Elder abuse, just like the court said. I've been seeing a therapist who's helping me understand why I became someone who could do something so terrible to his own mother. He swallowed hard. But I am asking for a chance to try to make amends, not to go back to how things were. That relationship wasn't healthy for either of us, but to see if we can build something new, something better. I studied my son's face, looking for signs of the manipulation that had characterized our relationship for so long. Instead, I saw genuine remorse, humility, and something else. A glimmer of the little boy he had once been, before entitlement and materialism warped his values. Amends take time, I said carefully, and trust, once broken, isn't easily restored. I know, he nodded. I'm prepared for that. I'm not expecting immediate forgiveness or for things to go back to normal. I'd like the chance to show you that I can change, that I want to change. After so many years of enabling bad behavior, of prioritizing peace over principle, the temptation to immediately smooth things over was strong. But I had learned painful lessons about the difference between forgiveness and foolishness. We can start small, I offered. Perhaps you could bring the children for Sunday dinner next weekend. Just a few hours to reestablish connection. Relief washed over his features. That would be, yes, thank you. As we finished our coffee, making practical arrangements for the visit, I felt cautiously hopeful, not naively expecting transformation overnight, but recognizing genuine contrition when I saw it. Outside the coffee shop, as we prepared to part ways, Peter hesitated. There's one more thing, Mom. The house, your house. I want you to know that I understand now why you fought so hard to protect it. It's not just property, it's independence, security, memories, identity. I see that now, living in a place that's just walls and a roof instead of a home. The insight surprised me. Yes, exactly. That's what I couldn't make you understand before. He nodded solemnly. I'm glad you stood up to us. Even though it was painful, even though it led to all this mess, you did the right thing protecting yourself. I needed that lesson, even if I didn't want it. As I drove home afterward, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought us here. They had made me sleep in the basement, treating me as less than welcome in my own home. That small indignity had revealed much larger threats lurking beneath the surface of our relationship, forcing painful but necessary confrontations and changes. The future remained uncertain. Rebuilding trust would take time. Some wounds might never fully heal. But I had rediscovered my voice, my boundaries, my essential self-worth in the process. And perhaps, just perhaps, my son had begun discovering his better self as well. Whatever came next, I would face it with the clarity and strength that comes from knowing exactly who you are and what you deserve. A lesson worth all the pain it took to learn. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.